All right, last session. You guys staying with me? All right. All right, we're passing around a couple things that I want to just go over, and then we're going to jump back in and talk about the holidays. This is the body outline that we give to kids, so feel free to make copies of any of this. We purposely don't copyright anything we do because we want people to just take it and use it. It's not why we do what we do. Memorial art projects, there's some things on that page. A whole page of journal starters. We talked about giving a first sentence to somebody and asking them to write. These are great things to do in groups or just if you have a neighbor that's grieving. Family tree assessment introduction. So this is a picture, it's hard to see, of a bunch of people in a tree. And we ask people to identify where they're at. So are you on the kid that's on the ground because you fell and hit your head? Are you the kid that's helping somebody else, kids and adults? So it's just a great activity to do with them. Hope. Listen, without hope, none of us are going to make it, you know. And so we need hope, and these are just some articles on how to help people understand hope. There is a little card in your folder called What's Your Grief? This is the best resource I've ever been able to find about everything grief related. And so they almost daily write a blog. So you can type in, you know, losing a pet, losing a brother-in-law, whatever, and there's all kinds of articles. So it's just a great resource if you have access to the internet. And then grief keys. You know, these are the keys we started out talking about what grief is and what it is and what kind of our goals are. So these are just some, you know, getting the facts, remembering, identifying changes, expressing feelings, and finding help. So just a great way, again, if you have a neighbor or somebody in your congregation that needs grief support. One other thing I wanted to say about grief is that people have this magical sense of how long grief should take. And what do you hear out in public? Typically I hear 1 year. It should take a year. Let me tell you, you're just skimming the surface after a year. The first year, a lot of people are just kind of numb. They're going through the motions. They're getting through that first Thanksgiving without their loved one, the first Christmas, the anniversary of the death. The second year is very often harder for people. And that's not great news, but I always tell people in my office, I'm going to be honest with you. Because I think if I'm honest with you, you can prepare for what it's going to be like. And I tell people it's not that you're getting worse. You're feeling it differently. So I've never had a hip replacement, but I hear they're very painful. When you come out of a hip replacement surgery, you're thinking, all right, I don't think this is too bad. I think I can manage this. But it's because you've got anesthetics still in your system. They're giving you some morphine or some good drugs to help with the pain, and it's manageable. 2 days later, when they make you get up in physical therapy and start walking on it, the pain's getting worse, it's getting worse. The pain's not getting worse. You're just feeling it for the first time, right? It's not getting worse. That first year, you're going through the motions. That second year can feel like it's worse. It's not, you're just feeling it differently. And it's important to understand that distinction because people will say, oh my gosh, I'm flunking grief. Like I'm going backwards, I can't even grieve right, it's getting worse. And we say it's not getting worse, it's different. It's different. The first period of, as you all know, after grief, you're just kind of numb going through the motions. And when some of that, I call it God's anesthesia, when some of that numbness starts wearing off, we start feeling things in a different way. So, before we jump in to talk about holidays and how we're all going to survive the holidays, which are right around the corner, any other questions or thoughts about anything we've talked about? Grief? How many of your...
I was just thinking, this is the teacher in me, taking the journal starters and cutting them in strips. And when you're feeling down, just pick one, not have one planned for yourself, but just pick one.
Yep.
Maybe that would be a good way to start it. I don't know.
That's a great idea. We only give one at a time, but I just typed them all on one sheet just for convenience. But yeah, cutting them apart would be perfect. Yes?
What was the resource you mentioned when you first started telling about the handout? You said the single most.
Yeah, it's called What's Your Grief? And there should be a business card in your folder.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. Yep. It's a great resource for information. All right. How to survive the holidays when you're grieving. You guys could probably write a book on this better than I could if you've survived the holidays. I like to remind people that the very first Christmas, which is the big holiday coming up, was a time of mourning for the people. Because if you remember, when Jesus was born, King Herod ordered all the baby boys under the age of 2 be killed and slaughtered. So that very first Christmas was a time of mourning in their culture, and sadness and crying. It wasn't, yay, a Savior's born, as we're all grieving and mourning. So the holiday that most of us dread the most, I just like to remind people that it is a holiday that is surrounded by grief when it initially started. And so I think that we can, all of us here, identify with that concept of grief. So the holidays are about traditions, and that's what makes it so difficult. And traditions are about the holidays, but they're about family, right? Because when you think about the traditions that you have, what is it? It's about everybody sitting around the Thanksgiving table eating dinner together. It's about on Christmas Eve we go Christmas caroling and we open one present. Tradition is typically about family. Even if it's just tradition of every Sunday afternoon we go to Mom's for dinner. You know, tradition is always about family. But when somebody in your family is missing, whoops, boy, I cannot get this. When somebody in your family is missing, that messes with tradition. It messes with our holidays. It messes with everything we've done up to that point in terms of celebrating in family. So that's why I think the holidays are a difficult time for people who are grieving. 2 quotes that I really like. First one is, tradition is an illusion of permanence. We think if this is how we do it, we're always going to do it that way. Well, guess what? If we always went to Grandma's house for Thanksgiving and Grandma died, we got to figure out a different plan. So that illusion of permanence, we always want things to be the same. And then tradition is a guide, not a jailer. So if the tradition is we always did this, that's a guide. It doesn't always have to be that way because it gets changed up when somebody dies. And we're going to talk about how that works. So a couple of things, and I have a booklet that I will give you on planning for the holidays. A couple of things that people who are grieving talk about a lot is, number one, just planning ahead. You know, even for those of us who may not be grieving, the holidays are a stressful time, right? Like, oh my gosh, it costs money, and you got to buy presents, and you're baking, you're doing all kinds of stuff. So even without grief, holidays are stressful. If we plan ahead, that typically helps ease the anxiety. Decide what you can comfortably handle. You know, if you've always had Thanksgiving dinner at your house and you're grieving this year, you may not be able to plan Thanksgiving. You may have to say somebody else needs to make the turkey. We could still hold it at my house, but somebody else needs to do the cooking. So decide what you can actually do. And then you need to let your needs be known. And that's really, really hard for the bereaved. When I do a lot of talking to groups in the community, we talk about, if you say to somebody who's grieving, if I can ever help, give me a call, are they going to?
Nope.
No, they can't. They physically cannot pick up a phone and call and ask for help. It's just impossible to do. So it's better for you to say, Mrs. Smith, I'd love to bring a meal to you this week. Can I bring it Tuesday or Wednesday? But if you say, Mrs. Smith, if I can help with anything, call me, she's not going to. So at the holidays, though, it's important for the bereaved person to let their family know what they can and can't handle. Yes?
But don't ever just show up. This is my problem. I would like to just bring a meal to someone, but, you know, you should really.
Oh, no, you can. You can.
And of course they're going to accept you, but I've always been like,
Well, what I would do is take a meal but not stay. Believe it or not, we have a lot of people who put a cooler on their front porch because, especially if a child dies, maybe their church community, they're going to bring meals for a couple of weeks. They don't want to see anybody. They don't have the energy. So they put a cooler on the front porch, and then the church sends out the email, like, whoever's bringing the meal, just leave it there. Because then they feel pressure to have to entertain. So, you know, obviously if they don't have a cooler, you're not going to do that. But I would take a meal and say, I'm not even coming in, I'm not staying. I just want you to know I'm praying for you, we're thinking about you, and here's a meal. Yep. Very good. Simplify the holidays. That's a little bit hard to read, but it says, for our Christmas greeting, please go to www.goldberg, you know. No, you're a tough crowd. I thought that was funny. He's simplifying. He's not even sending a card out. He's saying, here's our website. If you want, you know, Christmas pictures, you got to go to our website. Okay. The point is you have to make the holidays work for you when you're grieving. So it can't be about, we always bake 15 dozen cookies, we did this, we did that. You need to make it work for you. Simplifying is the best way to do that. Consider whether you can comfortably handle the responsibilities of the family dinner, the holiday parties, or if you wish someone else to do them. You know, and it's okay to ask for help. If you ask for help this year because your spouse just died, doesn't mean you're going to get help every year. That just means this year I can't manage and I'm going to ask for help. Decide whether or not you can talk about your loved one. Again, referring back to the hospital lady that I talked about who didn't want anybody to acknowledge her son. You can also do that with the holidays. And you can say, a lot of people on Christmas Eve, they put a stocking out for their loved one, their name. And during the holiday season, they have everybody come over and write in memory, a favorite memory about that loved one. They put it in the stocking, and on Christmas Eve, they read them. Very poignant time. But they say, we're going to do that on Christmas Eve, and then on Christmas Day, it's all about the grandkids. We're not going to be sad and grieving. So you can actually designate a time. To say I'm not going to be talking about it all is not realistic. So designate a time that works for you guys to process your grief, process the loved one. You can say, if you're inviting a bunch of new people to your house, let's not talk about Grandpa not being here now during the dinner, but knowing that in that evening when your close family stays by, you're going to process. So you can decide when to talk about it. Don't be afraid to make changes. People feel like if I don't put a Christmas tree up this year, I never will. And that's not necessarily true. You know, you can put a Christmas tree up. You can not do it the next year. You can do it the following year. So don't worry about any changes that you make being permanent. They don't have to be. They just have to be what's going to get you through the holidays this year. Don't pressure yourself. This guy says, I'm running out of time to be festive. And I think in the best of years when we're not grieving, the holidays are hard. They're stressful, right? They're just very, very stressful. One of the most important times during our, as a Christian is the birth of the Savior, but it can be really stressful because it's about jingle bells in a mall and, presents, and it becomes about so many different things. So there's pressure anyway. When you're grieving on top of that, it makes it even more difficult. Well, there they all are at once. Some of the ideas that I hear from people, open presents at a different time. That's the way to shake up the holidays. So maybe, if you always opened up your presents on Christmas Day, this year you're going to open them on Christmas Eve. Just changing the tradition a little bit helps people to tolerate things a little bit more. Have dinner at a different time. If you always had Christmas dinner at noon, have it at 5 o'clock. It's these little things that really impact people's ability to survive the holidays. Attend a different church service on Christmas Eve. So maybe Christmas morning you're going to your own church, but you're going to go somewhere else Christmas Eve where people don't know you, where they don't know you're grieving, and you can actually just go in, do what you need to do, pray, and you don't have to talk about it. Let the children and grandchildren take over the decorating, the baking. Now, it may not be, the Hallmark Christmas tree that you always have decorated, but if the grandkids do it this year, there's no harm in that, right? Whatever you need to do to survive it. Change your routine. We talked a little bit about that. Get out of Dodge. Some people, they just leave. They get out of Dodge for the holidays. Very, very common thing to do, and I think it's a great thing to do. The only caveat I tell people is that at some point you come back to an empty house, and you have to confront that. And so if we don't talk about it, it catches them off guard. They go to, we live in Ohio. They go to Florida for Christmas, Disney World. They come back, and oh my gosh, it's an empty house, and now the grief just kind of floods over them. So as long as we prepare for it, it works. It's unbelievable to me the number of bereaved people that actually just go away for the holidays. Cut back on your activities. You don't need to go Christmas caroling and do all the things that you typically have done over the holidays. So just cut back on some things. Communicate your needs. Make sure your family knows. Start new traditions. This is a great time to start a new tradition. And you have the opportunity to keep the tradition the same, completely eliminate it, or change it. That's really your three choices for anything that we're talking about. Putting up a Christmas tree, going to church, Christmas caroling, wrapping presents. You can change them and then change them back the next year. So if you change them, it doesn't mean they have to be permanent. You can also start new traditions. I love this. Rejoice in the little things. And the dog, do you see the dog? Indoor plumbing, yay. All right, you're waking up now. Some tips. There are people who say, I don't have to and I don't want to. Great. You don't have to do Christmas this year. You don't have to do Thanksgiving. You don't have to do whatever the traditions are. Give yourself permission to not do it if you don't want to, if you can't do it. Again, it doesn't mean you're not going to do it the following year. Drop before you shop instead of shop till you drop. I always recommend like a one-stop shopping for people who are grieving. So whether that means you go online on Amazon and order one thing for everybody on your gift list, or go to one store, go to a bookstore and buy a book for everybody on your list and put an inscription, this is from Grandpa and me. You know, that's very meaningful. You don't have to, people who are grieving, the malls are terrible at Christmas time because everybody's happy and they're singing, and you don't want to be happy. You don't want to be singing. You want to stop the world because your world changed the day your loved one died. So figure out how to do the shopping piece if you have to do it that works for you. Making a list and checking it twice. Again, eliminate people. You don't have to, nobody's going to be upset if they don't get a present from you this year. You know, so you have to do what works for you. Oh, hang on. Just say no. You're allowed to say no to people. Mom, you always baked the pumpkin pies for Thanksgiving. Nope, this year I'm going to go to the store and buy one. You're allowed to say no. You get a pass when you're grieving. Tell me again. Again, people like to tell stories, especially at holidays, because we want to remember what Christmas was like last year with Grandpa, or what Thanksgiving was like last year with Grandpa. And you need to say things like, Grandpa always carved the turkey. Who's going to carve the turkey this year? And then we talk about it, and we all cry for a moment because we miss Grandpa. But then we go on and we have a happy meal. So just to make sure that you do talk about, tell me again. I think we missed one, memory, surprise. Most people don't like surprises when they're grieving. So we need to tell people, you know, we're coming over. People need to tell you they're coming over because when you're grieving, you don't always fill up the company, and so just no surprises. What ideas have you all used or shared that works for the holidays? I know you guys have some.
I spent one Thanksgiving at the beach.
Uh-huh. Did that work for you?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I met a young man, probably in his late 20s, that was there with a young child fishing, and I had a nice chat with the child,
Uh-huh.
and it made it a happy moment.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What else works?
I think what worked for me when my sister died was just making sure I connected
Mm-hmm.
with my other siblings
Mm-hmm.
to share memories, talk about it, and that, I think that helped all of us.
Right. Right. It's important to do that, and typically people pick a specific time to do that because it can be overwhelming to feel like the family's all coming for Thanksgiving and I'm going to be sad all day. But you can tell people, you know what, after dinner, we're just going to sit around the table for 15 minutes and talk about our favorite story about Grandpa or Grandma or whoever. And then it keeps it to a specific time frame, and that's more manageable for people. But I think you had your hand up.
I was going to say exactly what Etta said. I'm the oldest of three brothers. I'm the family historian, and I've been known to tell a good story or two.
I believe that. I believe that.
So I end up at family gatherings, with all these old remembrances of
Sit down for a second.
things my parents did, and usually ends up with a lot of laughter.
Great way to break the tension. Yeah. Who else?
I don't think if you have memories, you remember. I think about
Memories?
memories,
Mhm.
yes. Like, talk about how we had Christmas when I was growing up,
Mhm.
my children.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I took them home to Jamaica for Christmas, and we had Christmas under the tree, eating outside, and they thought that was lyric.
Yeah. Shaking up the tradition a little bit.
Right.
Yeah. Very good. Yes.
How do you give yourself permission to say it's okay to change things? Sometimes it's awfully hard
That's
to
hard.
give yourself permission to do it.
And sometimes it's about expectations. My family always expected that I make, 5 dozen cookies for Christmas Eve. My family expected that I do that. I think part of it is just, I always say you have to advocate for yourself because nobody's going to look after you the way you look after yourself. And just to be able to say, you know what, I wish I could do that this year. There's no way I can. I hope I can do it next year, but how can I help this year make that happen? So whether you offer to buy the pies or something like that. Most people who are grieving don't have a lot of energy, so it's not hard to not say, I can't do that because you just don't have the energy. They say that in grieving, the amount of work your psyche does is equivalent to digging a ditch. Excuse me. So the amount of physical energy it would take to dig a ditch outside, that's what our mind, our psyche does when we're grieving. So when you're grieving, you can sleep for 15 hours and you wake up exhausted and you think, how can I be tired? I just slept for 15 hours. It's because when you finally slow down and go to sleep, your mind stops. In your psyche, your soul, your emotion, they start feeling things. And so people do a lot of grief work when they're sleeping, and they stay sleeping a lot because it takes a lot of work, which is, again, why you wake up exhausted sometimes. Sleep's very, very important when you're grieving. Anything physical, exercise, it just helps physically with what's going on. But if you haven't been bereaved, you don't know what this feels like, right? And it makes me crazy when somebody loses a child and then another person will say, I hear them in the lobby, I lost my dog, so I know exactly what that feels like. No, you don't. Losing a dog is very sad. If that's your family, it's, grieving absolutely. You can't say that to somebody who lost a child and expect them to agree with you or understand. So it's about sticking up for yourself and saying, I'm sorry that, or walking away, do what you need to, because you don't need that kind of negative energy. It's not helpful. It takes a lot of energy to do this, though, doesn't it? It takes a lot of energy. It would be easier just to go to bed, wouldn't it?
Yep.
People want to go to bed in end of October and wake up in January, skip the holidays altogether, and they do. And some people do, but not the people that have 5-year-olds that want Santa Claus to come. You have to get out of bed. Other just questions in general. We're at the end, and I know you want to talk about the group, but any questions about grief in general? Anything we've talked about? Yes.
Not a question, but I haven't heard you mention, and I've heard many times when a spouse dies, the other spouse living should not make any major decisions within the first year.
Yes,
and I think
we would.
that's very helpful.
We would agree with that, and because in the first year you're just going through the motions, you're not fully engaged back in life. You can't be because you're grieving, and so people will say, I'm getting rid of all of his clothes because it's too painful to look at him. We say, we get that that's painful. How about you box them up and put them in the basement? Because 8 months from now, you may want something. If you've given it all away, you can't get it back necessarily. So moving, those kind of things are really difficult to make those big life decisions within a first year. Yeah.
Yeah, you talk about the exhaustion.
Mm-hmm.
When should that go away? I mean, when should you be energized again?
Well, that's a good question. We always recommend people who are grieving go to get a physical checkup, because if you're not sleeping well, and it's understandable that you're not sleeping well, your body isn't getting what it needs to feel re-energized, so you do stay tired. Some people have trouble going to sleep. Some people have trouble staying asleep. Those are two different things. We talk to the doctor about what can I do to help me stay asleep, because we know your body needs rest to be able to rejuvenate itself. And if you don't get it, if you remember what it was like to have a 2-year-old or an infant in the house, you're up several times a night, you never really feel rested. That impacts our ability to drive, to concentrate, to do a lot of things. So it's important to get that physical care while you're grieving. It's understandable that people don't, but it's important to do that. Yeah. Well, he's going to grab you the mic.
I found there were 2 times in my life, the way that it went, that I needed to write things down. And I would advise anyone, obviously the people here who've lost a spouse already know this, but whenever you lose a spouse, no matter what happens, make sure you write everything down every day, every document that you have done, everything that you need to follow up, date it, and because 2 weeks from now you'll think, oh my, did I do that? I can't remember if I did it or not. If you go back to your journal or to your paper and find out that, yes, you did do that, then you know that you did take the birth certificate to the insurance company, or you did change the title on the car, or you did do all of the things that you needed to do. And the
Great
other,
suggestion.
yeah, it's imperative. And had I not, my son and daughter-in-law are both attorneys, and they helped me with everything, but I still had to write everything down, because then when they left me to go back home, then it's like, oh yes, we did do that. Okay, and then because out of the blue will become something that's like, I wonder if we did that. And you have it in writing, and the date, make sure to date the journal. The other time when I journaled was after my husband had a traumatic brain injury from an automobile accident on the way to work, and it was black ice in New Hampshire. And there were times for the first week I had no idea if he was going to live. And so I would go home and I would journal, and I would write down things, and I would think that he was doing okay. And whether it's a traumatic brain injury or an acquired brain injury, which it would be stroke, their brain functions differently according to what brain component has been damaged. And so I would interpret one behavior one way, and then I would realize that later on that wasn't what he was able to do. The other thing I'll tell you, I was a registered nurse, and I was teaching high school students in voc ed at the time. So I would write these things down, and then there would be confusion about what he thought I was doing and what I thought I was doing. There was also confusion about finances. There was a major amount of confusion about who was going to be where, when, and the feelings. And so I have a journal that's probably, I don't know, at least a year, maybe 2 years long, maybe longer. And I found that to be very beneficial, is just to write down what I was thinking and how I was feeling.
Very good, very good. Over there, we have
Somebody there, and then somebody here.
One of the things that I had done was, particularly because he'd been ill with COPD, was that I kept all the records of all his hospitalizations for a year. And by golly, if I didn't have to go back a year later and prove that I had it. So I had a box that I put everything in. I still haven't, it's not quite 2 years. I still haven't gone through to really organize the, but Esther's thing about writing, or if you're too busy, you don't want to just throw it. I had a special box, threw it in the box. And so I didn't know if I needed it or not. And, but it was very important to keep papers.
Because you can't count on your memory when you're grieving. Right.
Yeah, I was just going to say that when my dad passed away, I remember, I don't think ever in my life I forgot so many things and lost so many things and misplaced so many things. It's very true, and I think writing it down is really helpful. We had Terry and then somebody over here.
Yeah. I tell people when they're sent in my office, if your shoes match, you're having a great day, because it's those little things that's really hard to keep track of. Yeah.
My question is, suppose the other people don't understand. For an example, and this may sound silly, but Mom always did the turkey. And she would say to me, come on over here, Terry, I'm going to show you what to do. And she would rub mustard on the skin. And, well, I can't stand that feeling. So I'd say, no, Mom, I'm never going to cook a turkey. So when Mom did pass, of course, Thanksgiving came about, and everybody figured my children figured we're going to Mom's house now because Emma isn't here. And I said, I'm not doing the turkey. And they said, but you have to. That's tradition. Moms do the turkey. And I said, no, I can't. I never did. And my mother knew why. You know, I said, Meme knew why. But they just couldn't understand. I refused to do the turkey the first several years. Actually, I've probably only done 2 turkeys in my 51 years of marriage. But yeah, I don't know. But they didn't understand.
Right.
How do you cope with that? How do you know?
You're not always going to get them to understand, because it's the difference between, it's like those baby mobiles they used to have on cribs where there was one thing and then there was like 5 things. And if you jiggle the one thing, that's like the person who died, everything else moves, but it moves differently. So we expect at some point that we're going to bury our parents, right? We know either we're going to bury our spouse or our spouse will bury us. You never expect to have to bury a child. That just goes against nature. So your kids grieving a grandparent is different than you grieving a mom. for all the things that we've talked about. So they're not looking at it from you losing a mom and that tradition and passing down recipes. They're just looking at, we want the turkey. So some of it is just education, helping them to understand, you lost a grandmother, but I lost a significant person. It's just education, education, education. It really is, because they don't, depending on their age, too, kids don't get it.
Yeah, I just wanted to integrate on the idea of journalizing, because at the times that I have done it, and then I go back and reread it after a period of time, I can see, because sometimes I feel like I'm not making any progress, but yet when I go back and read my journals, I can see where I've come from and that I have made a lot of progress.
It's a great benefit of journaling.
Yep. Reflect on it.
One of the things that you wasn't touched upon very much was the dynamics of the passing of friends. And that, like particularly after my husband died, the dynamics of friendships, or as you get older, I should say, as you get older, your family moves away and your dynamics of your church and your friends. And I think the families sometimes forget that that it has affected their lives as well. And because
Absolutely.
the friends are the frosting on the cake.
Right. Well, and I say our family is who we choose. It's not always blood, And so if you have family that, lives far away, your friends or people that you go to church with, they may really be like your family. And so people are going to say, well, that was just a neighbor that died. That's not even a relative. But for you, that's the significance of that relationship is very, very important.
I have one problem. Of course, Bob Moy died just a month ago. And everybody that sees me, they say, oh, I'm so sorry. What can I do for you? Well, everybody was asking me, what can they do for me? Well, I'm trying to think, what could they do for me? Because I can't help myself. So I started saying, well, you could invite me for dinner. Well, I haven't seen anybody invite me yet.
And again, that's because your reality therapy. If it could happen to you, it could happen to me. So.
Well, the neighbor next door last week, they did take me out for pizza for supper, and it was wonderful. And then one other couple, he said, you can have dinner at my house anytime. So I knew he was having spaghetti, so I just went over and said, boy, I'm dying for spaghetti. So I did have a dinner there, but other than that, nobody has come over or brought me any food or anything to eat.
That's why the church ministry is so important. The Bible talks about taking care of what a pure religion is, caring for orphans and widows in distress. Who are orphans and widows? The people who've lost, the people who've had a death. Pure religion is caring for orphans and widows. Right?
Well, one thing about this church is somebody had said to me, they were so glad I came back because there's a lot of love in this church, and that's the truth.
And you go to this congregation?
Oh, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I wanted to share, and I don't know if you shared this at one of our seminars up north or where we heard this, but we were talking about this at our grief support groups up north, that there was this family that had, I don't know, several children, and the funeral was about to happen, the next day or so, and instead of asking, what can we do for you, I think the mom or somebody from the family just came over and polished all the shoes for the funeral.
Wow.
Got that. So I think instead of asking, just take the initiative and do something, something very practical that will help the family at that time.
That seems invasive. I was just going to say that. Well, if they don't want to.
Well, they appreciate it.
Yeah.
They appreciate it.
If you know them, you wouldn't do it if you knew they would be upset by it.
I agree. I mean, I personally probably wouldn't have that personality to do that, but in this case, the family appreciated it, and it was true practical help.
Okay.
No, I understand it being practical, but just to know what would be acceptable to another person, because I'm a very private person, and
Are you sure? She doesn't have it in dirty shoes.
When you're grieving, your priorities change and things, if you've been a private person, sometimes that changes. Your tolerance for what I call petty crap goes away. So you go to work, you've had a miscarriage, and somebody says, oh my God, I was up all night, I couldn't get my baby to sleep. And you're thinking, I'll trade places with you in a heartbeat to have my baby, right? Or, oh my gosh, I got a flat tire, worst day of my life. And you want to say, seriously? Worst day of your life, you had a flat, let's talk about when you have a death, your priorities just change, your tolerance for stuff changes. So sometimes people who would have been very private, like, great, I don't care, come in and do my shoes, that was really helpful, I don't. So sometimes that just changes because you change when you grieve, permanently change.
It's so hard to know how to help Martha and David right now.
I agree, I agree.
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Yeah, I agree.
I didn't know
I
what to do.
understand where you're coming from, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so when you're talking about friends, it took me way back to my time, when we went home to Jamaica and our friends started getting killed, and we were young, you know, and all of us had young families, and every single week we lost a friend. Somebody was killed for about 2 years, every single week. And what we decided to do was meet at the person's house, which would be all the wife left behind. And we all brought food, like potluck. You know, we just sat there for a whole day and kind of just grieved with the person. But it was the whole sadness over the community. The whole sadness was just like a big shadow, a big cloud. You know, there's nothing you could do about it. Because I mean, there are soldiers everywhere.
But just sitting and being with people. And I think that's one of the traditions in the Jewish faith, is that they sit Shiva. So for 7 days, you just go to the person's house and you just, ministry of presence, you're just being with them and supporting. And that's so important
Every
to do.
day, and it sometimes it lasted for 2 weeks. You know, like, because if I couldn't go this day, then another friend went, and then it just got to be a big, like, living in total grief. You know,
Grief overload, we call it. When there's a lot of deaths, we call that grief overload. You don't have a chance to finish processing one, and you've had another death.
Absolutely. And these are people you went to school with.
Right.
Or you knew at work, or you knew my neighbor, her house got broken into. And it was all political, of course. And she came over in the middle of the night, and then she couldn't find her son, sorry. And she had to lock her daughter up in a closet. She couldn't find her son for 2 days. And he ran away, rolled up the hill, and was unconscious for 2 days. And then he turned up. And I mean, we were all relieved, but we thought he got killed. So, you know, the sadness, and it was just awful.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Thank you. I do want to encourage you to ask any questions that you weren't able to ask during the seminar. Is there anybody else who would like to ask a question or contribute? Well,
I have.
Go ahead.
Sorry. A few more things. I'm going to hand this to you because I need to hold on to something going down.
Okay.
So there's a booklet on how to survive the holidays with all kinds of tips and information. There's 2 other articles about the holidays, how you get through those. And then I have umbrellas, just for everybody to take one, just because, not because I want you to go have a margarita when we leave here, but because put it on your desk. It's just a reminder that our job is to hand umbrellas to people and really lessen the effect of the suffering in their life. We can't take suffering away, but we can lessen the effect. So, any questions in general about grief? This is a full day. It's a lot to process, so I appreciate your time. Yes?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that one of the greatest things that was done for me right after my daughter's death was for a neighbor came in, and as she was talking about, wrote everything down for me, telephone numbers, everything. And that was such a help to me.
Right.
And that's something we could do for someone else.
Right, because your memory is affected when you're grieving. Right. So do you want me to do that? And do you want to talk about the grief group here?
Yeah.
Let's go on. So then I have 2 other handouts I'm just going to start passing around about.
Yeah, let's give Julia a hand. She just did a wonderful
thank
job,
you.
really.
There's 2 different ones.
Thank you for taking the time and joining us here all the way from
my
Ohio.
privilege.
We appreciate it a lot and appreciated everything that you shared with us. We have a sign-up sheet that I'm going to send around on this side and then also on this side of the sanctuary. And basically what this is all about is on December 2nd, that's a Wednesday, we're going to start our own grief support group here at our church. We're going to meet once a month, and it is from 10 to 11:30 on December 2nd. And, you know, if you know of someone, or if you yourself feel that as a follow-up to today's seminar, you could use the support of a grief support group, then we highly, recommend this one and for you to attend it. Just to share with you, when my wife and I first were married, we served a church in Michigan for 3.5 years. We were newlyweds, and the tradition of this ethnic church, this was an American-Hungarian Reformed church, was that each person that passed away in the congregation, they had 2 full services for them, which was the night before the funeral. We had a full, which could have been considered a funeral service in itself. It was a wake service. And then the following day, we had the actual funeral service either at the funeral home or at the church, and then actually a third one, a graveside service. So in 3.5 years, we did over 80 funerals. So you multiply that by 3, that's 240 services. And in all that time, I really felt that the church was very supportive. We really did everything that we could to help the families during that, initial loss that they experienced. And then as we moved on in ministry, up north in Ohio, where we were for almost 14 years, we had one particular situation where there was a gentleman who suffered from cancer, and he passed away. And then about four weeks later, the same lady who had lost her husband also lost her 40-some-year-old special needs son, who still lived with them, unexpectedly to a heart attack. So here's a family who had, losses within 1 month. 2 people died in the family. And I was called, I couldn't actually believe when I received the phone call about having to go to the emergency room because their son had just passed away. I was in disbelief. I couldn't believe it, that this had happened. And when I was there, praying with the family, I remember the sister of the family member that had died saying that, we need some more help. We need a support group or something like that. And so out of that, in our congregation was born a support group that met once a month. And I have to admit to you, that was the first time in all the years of ministry where I felt that even though the church might do a really good job, it's not enough to just reach out to the family at that immediate time of loss, but there has to be more. There has to be a follow-up. And a grief support group can really do that. Now, the wonderful thing about a grief support group is that it's supposed to be confidential, so what you share within the group stays within the group. And you will also feel that sense of solidarity, and that you are not alone in your loss and in your grief. And so we started that, and for, I want to say, about 7 years or so, every month we had those meetings. And so that's what we're going to do here at our church starting December 2nd. I'm going to let this go around. This is a brochure about our grief support group. And again, if you know of someone, just pass on the flyer, or if you yourself feel the need, then you're certainly welcome to join us for that. December 2nd, Wednesday from 10 to 11:30. Okay? Anything else?